Hey, everybody, welcome to the living room. I appreciate your presence here. I believe you're really going to enjoy this inspiring conversation. Do me a favor, press that subscribe button, press the notification bell so you can know when we have other inspiring conversations coming. Share it with family and friends so they can be inspired too. Enjoy today's conversation. Welcome to the living room where we listen, learn, and live together. I'm your host, Richard Martin. I'm glad you're here. Make yourself right at home. I once heard it said that God's gift to us is life, and our gift to God is what we do with it. And if that is true, and I believe it is, then our special guest seeks to live every day as a gift to the God he loves. A worshiper at heart, he lives and leads from center to circumference, blending his gifts for creativity, ministry, musicality, and storytelling for the good of others. Together with his wife and their children, they both nationally and internationally seek to provide people with the gift of transformation that happens in authentic community. Some of you may know him and others may not, but I believe by the end of our conversation, you will truly be inspired. Please welcome to the living room, my friend, my brother, Pastor Damian Chandler. What's going on, brother?
What's going on, Rich? It's nice to be here with you in the living room, sitting on the virtual couch. And
Yes, sir.
Just looking forward to the fellowship together, man. What's up, y'all? Just saying hi to everyone across the virtual space. Great to be here.
Yes, indeed, man. I first met you years ago. I was in Christian ministry with Dr. James Doggett. And I want to say you had just arrived. This was probably, you got to Huntsville in 2011 or 2008. I can't remember which one.
Bro, that's so long ago, but 11 sounds right.
That makes sense then. It was a Christian ministry class, unless you happen to have been visiting maybe for the Pastors Conference, PELC, in years prior to moving officially. And you came and did a workshop with us on praise and worship, music and worship, the ministry that is music in the Christian worship class. And I had heard of you before based on some songs that you had written. We'll talk about that. But this particular one was Lord, We Have Come. And so I remember just the session was great. And then afterwards, a few of us kind of huddled around the front of the class and just chopped it up a little bit more. And you know how it is when you are a budding theologian, or really if you get a chance in whatever your academic field is to talk to someone who's already in it, especially who is closer in age to you. Like Dr. Dog is great. He was fantastic, right? Yeah. But like someone a little bit closer, you're like, yo, let's talk to him to get the real. And you just kind of gave us your time, your honesty, your transparency. I think you gave us like email or number saying, hey, keep in contact with me. And so I was forever grateful for that, because it kind of just allowed us to know that this academic journey does have a destination. And once you get there, you know, when you're in the books in the classroom, it's like, will this ever end? Will I ever be able to put boots on the ground? And so whenever Dr. Doggett and other teachers would bring back alums, it was always refreshing. And then, of course, since then, having had the chance to see your journey in ministry a little bit more up close after you did move to Huntsville with your family, and then ultimately moving to your current pastorate, it's just been a blessing and a joy. And we're going to unpack that, I hope, a little bit today, man. I want to go back to the beginning, man, and just ask you to describe and share with us, you know, what was life like growing up? Where did you grow up? And what was your upbringing like, man?
Oh, man. So mine is my upbringing is just wide and varied. I'm born in Toronto, Canada. And from Toronto, my parents were from Barbados. So my parents moved back to Barbados for my dad to open up a business. And so that's where I grew up. You know, I lived in Barbados from the time I was 3 or 4 until I was 16. So I got that full island life. I got that, you know, my dad swimming out to the fishermen coming in, buying
Sure.
fish from the fishermen while the boat's still in the sea, and
Wow.
roasting it on the beach with some breadfruit. You know,
Yes, sir.
just the whole island experience, man. High school, middle school, elementary school, in Barbados, and I think that having a North American birth, but a Caribbean upbringing really
Sure.
added a sense of variety to my life. But it
Mhm.
also started this theme that has run through my entire life and my entire ministry, which is a
Mm.
theme of being an outsider and a theme of having a home, but not really being from there. You know, I'm there, but
Sure.
I'm not really from there. So
Sure.
when I was in Barbados, they always saw me as a kid from Canada. And when I was in Canada, they always saw me as a kid from Barbados, right?
Yeah.
I think that God did something special with this idea of being an outsider, and it has literally, Richard, followed me through every single phase of my life. Every single
Mm.
phase of my life, this idea of being an outsider has been there. But I grew up in Barbados. From there, went back to the States. I played soccer for my entire life. I had a chance to play for my country for about 4 or 5 years. And so I was following this dream of soccer until God miraculously brought that dream to a halt and called me
Wow.
to play on a different team.
Yes, sir. First of all, this is my first time hearing that. I did not know that you played and were pursuing that professionally, even on a national stage.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I'm grateful that you've invited us in so early on to say, just by way of my own biographical narrative, there's this theme that is set. And I'm sure that many people can resonate with that, even if they did not move different places. I mean, they could have been born and raised in place A, and yet still plug into what you just shared. So let's push a little bit further. You live in Barbados, grow up there for a significant amount of time, your formative years, really and truly, which are important years. And I think you shared this with us before, and I always thought this was very interesting that many people have maybe I grew up in a place where there was like a large, let's say, city center church or university church environment, or something that allowed me to have just like a lot of people around. But if I remember correctly, you shared with us once that, man, I kind of got a lot of early seeds planted in my life because we did this thing in a house.
Yeah.
Share that with us, man.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think, to be fair, Richard, in order to share that, I have to share that my background was not I was not a born Seventh-day Adventist.
Sure.
Even, you know, till later years, I joined the church. And so my background is that my grandfather was an itinerant minister. Right.
Wow.
He was often called, when a minister would retire, they would call my grandfather to lead the church. And my grandfather prayed to God and said, God, my grandfather is really light and my
Okay.
grandmother is really dark, and all of their kids are dark. So my grandfather said to God, God, if you would give me a child that looked like me, I would give him back to you in ministry. And out popped my dad. So my grandfather would grab my dad and they would literally go around the island. It was Church of God was the church that we were a part of. He would drag him around the island, and my dad learned how to play all kinds of instruments. And my grandfather would do revivals. My dad would play, and every once in a while he would preach. But the robe of ministry never really fit him. You know, my dad said, you know, I can do it. I have gifts to do it, but I didn't really feel called to do it. My grandfather felt very disappointed. And then my father had me, and my father really wanted me to take over his business.
Okay.
And then one
Which
day,
was what, if I may ask?
he builds houses. My dad builds houses. He's an architect and he builds houses. And so that's what I had always wanted to do. I had signed up at Temple University to be an architect. Wow. And then God's hand, you know, just interrupted my life. Just absolutely. He is so rude. He doesn't even ask for permission. He just interrupted my life and called me into ministry. One of the ways that he directed that is that I moved to New Jersey again, pursuing playing soccer in high school there. And my uncle, I have a number of ministers in my family. My uncle started a church in his basement. And if you've never had church in your house as a teenager, then you haven't really had church.
Yeah.
It was 9 of us, 9 or 10 of us. When we had 15 people, we had a lot of people at church, and he would preach his heart out. And it was in that basement actually that I first discovered the gift of writing songs, because we didn't have a praise team, we didn't have a band. He played the keyboard a bit, and one day while he was preaching, man, it felt like if the Spirit of the Lord was in the room. And we just started to sing, and we just started to sing out of the overflow of what we were experiencing that evening. And I can still remember the song. It's not the sound of a trumpet. It's not the sound of instruments. It's the sound of victory that I hear. And we just sang that song, for like 30 minutes, just those words. And we just, it was prophetic. It was that moment was everything. But when that church, Richard, said that we were having all night prayer meeting was all night.
It was all night.
We started at 9, and we had breakfast together at 6 a.m. When I didn't feel like going to church, I remember one day you're a teenager. I didn't want to go to church. So I laid in my bed, and one of the mothers of the church came up the stairs and walked into my room and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm sick." And she says, "You're not sick." And she dragged me out of my bed. Now, we wore Sunday's best. She dragged me out of my bed to the basement in my pajamas. And I was in church in my pajamas because she would not let me skip. But there's so many things there. And again, this was not an Adventist environment, but man, did God pour into me there, just visions and dreams about my future and what I would be called into, and people speaking over me and reminding me of who I was in God. At that time I was pursuing soccer, and my dream fell apart. I was in the country illegally. I couldn't work. I couldn't go to school. I didn't even know what a social security number was, right? Until I applied for school and they asked me for this number. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. I was just living with my uncle. So I watched all my friends go off to college, man. And again, this theme of being an outsider, watch all my friends go off to college, help them pack up their rooms, and literally watch their cars disappear into the distance while they're pursuing their dream. And I had no dream for myself. And I couldn't work. So their parents hired me to weed their gardens, so I'm a graduate of high school, and I'm weeding gardens for $100 after 2 weeks or a week of work, And one day I've only just now become bold enough to speak this in these circles. One day I was in a garden weeding, just feeling lost. And man, this presence showed up on my left side. It was as bright as the noonday sun, and started to speak to me about my future, and told me that it was a church that I would join and a people that I would be connected to, and started to speak to me about where I would go and what I would do, and told me I needed to go. It was like my Macedonian call. I needed to go back to Toronto. I was in New Jersey at that time. Man, I ran out of that. It was so clear. Like everything that I would be and everything that I would do was so clear. And I wasn't Seventh-day Adventist. I ran out of that garden, ran into my friend's room, my friend's house, to his parents, and start to spit out all this stuff, right, that had just been revealed to me. And the next day, I bought a ticket on a Greyhound to Toronto, went back to Toronto, and that next Sabbath, I was sitting in a Seventh-day Adventist church for the first time. And really, I don't think that I missed many Sabbaths since.
So I want to ask 2 questions to get back to that very point. The first is, when it came to that moment of clarity, your dreams have fallen apart. As much clarity that came subsequent to that, was it difficult to say, okay, that's that, and what's next? Or did you feel very real feelings like, man, I have worked, I have labored, I have imagined what it was going to be like? Because you mentioned two things. You said there was a professional soccer track, but then there's also architecture, right? Yeah. So neither of these things are coming to fruition. As that is happening in your life, are you frustrated? Are you kind of like, yeah, something will happen? Describe to us what those feelings are, and then I'll ask another question after that.
Sure. As you could tell from this interview, I kind of go around the circumference of questions that are asked oftentimes, because the color in life actually makes life interesting, right? So when I left to go to Toronto, I wasn't leaving to go do ministry. I was leaving to still pursue soccer, right? I joined a team there. And it was a traveling team that would travel to the States often. I only missed Sabbath if I was traveling, playing. And we were in Ohio, played a big tournament there in Dayton, and balled out, went crazy. Yeah. And at the end of the game, the head coach of the team we had just lost to walked up to me and said, man, I'd like to offer you a full scholarship to University of Dayton Flyers, Big East, Division I, everything that I wanted, right? That's what I had been pursuing. Not long after that, I fell and injured, and I was injured, and I never recovered. But the Lord let me down so softly. Which, man, it gives me goosebumps to think about his love, because this is something I had been doing my whole life. He knew he just couldn't cut it off. So while soccer was still there, this church life was just rising. Yeah. There was a youth group that I was a part of now. And, there was a little girlfriend that I had called Tanzy Chandler. And, so soccer was still there, but there was something else that was rising, that was taking up space in my life. So when that coach finally called and says, man, we need you to either accept the scholarship or not, I remember Tanzy was actually there, and I pulled out this letter from the school, from my drawer, and I called him and I said, Coach, I'm going to have to turn you down. I'm injured. I don't know if I'll ever be better. I don't seem to be getting better. And from there, someone that you know very well, Wesley Knight, who is my first cousin, had called me, and he says, hey, man, why don't you come down to Alabama, go to school with me? I was like, no one wants to go to Alabama. Then he says, there's this school called Oakwood College. And I was like, okay, do you guys have a soccer team? He's like, right. I think so. And he hesitated. I was like, okay, do you have a stadium? Do you have a soccer stadium? And he was like, I see them playing soccer like in the oak tree, amongst the oak trees. I was like, dude, forget that. I got off the phone, the Lord, and I made a dastardly promise to the Lord. I said, God, if you're calling me to this, let Wesley call me back within the next 3 weeks and tell me he's doing the evangelistic campaign. I won't even ask. Mm-hmm. He called me back a few weeks later. He says, hey, Damian. I said, yes. He said, guess what? And I said, you're coming to Toronto to do an evangelistic campaign. He's like, yeah, how'd you know? And I said, I just knew. And, I just knew. So the process, but I praise God that the process, he gave me a soft landing. He respected my desires and my dreams and my goals. And, if I take one step further, I know you have other questions, man. I ended up in England for the first time a few years ago. I ended up in England. It was probably a decade ago, and I was preaching at Watford Coliseum. And on the way to Watford Coliseum, we passed Wembley, which is the grand kingdom of soccer. And that same voice that called me into ministry spoke to me then and says, Damian, you thought you were going to play soccer in front of thousands. Now I'm going to call for you to preach for me in front of the entire world. Yeah. And that transference really allowed me to put down my soccer cleats completely and be able to say, man, I'm literally on a new team, and I'm going to do exact same thing. I'm going to ball out for Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to somehow take me before thousands.
Sure.
And that's the reason why a further question, you asked later on about Oshkosh was prophetic for me, because
Sure.
it was the completion of that word that God
Right.
gave those years before.
I think many times our generation can kind of really take a didactic and academic approach primarily to the fulfillment of purpose. Mm-hmm. And what you've just shared with us is, man, at various points in your life, this can be as early as teens, it can be earlier than that. God himself can, in a very real way, speak. You get this question a lot as a pastor. I know I do. How does God speak? What does his voice sound like? And years ago, I really used to try to formulate the best theological answer I could provide to that, and more, I'm becoming a little less academically astute with it and saying, I believe God speaks in ways that people can understand. That's it for me, right?
Great answer.
So you will know, basically. And I think that, and you mentioned it, and I appreciate you trusting us with that kind of transparency, because I hear you, right? Not everyone can really get on board with, God really revealed himself to me. God showed God's self to me in a way that I could understand, believe in, and accept. I'm right there with you, man. I do think that the Lord does that. I think that he does speak. I think he gives us insight. He might not give us the full details of our itineraries, but he gives us enough, right? Yeah. For us to have some confirming conviction. My wife and I call them God markers. Like if you're traveling down the highway and there are mile markers, you get lost. Hey, where are you? I'm mile marker 157. There are God markers in life that allow us to really look back and kind of gauge, look how far we've come. Absolutely. I love Wesley said, how'd you know? I just knew. And it's those things that really allow us to walk forward in life, even as we look back over life. It's kind of a rhythm, we're walking forward as we're looking back, because those things are kind of bringing things to fruition. So as you go from Jersey to Toronto, this opportunity that comes with Ohio, did you know that it was a Seventh-day Adventist church based on what God said to you? Or was this kind of outworking of, I had family that was Seventh-day Adventist. So when I got to Toronto, that's where they went. And that's where I went.
Yeah, that really it's the latter.
Okay.
Again, remember the theme of being outsider, and so now I'm at this Seventh-day. The Seventh-day Adventist people are really interesting, because our knowledge of the world of church outside of Seventh-day Adventism is very shallow. We don't really know anything. Everybody who goes to church on Sunday is a Pentecostal. So in my entire life, I had only heard anyone speak in tongues one time in my life. And I think the woman was drunk. Right. So, but when I went to this church, I was the Pentecostal. Right. Sure. And that created some interesting experiences, some really positive and some not. But my mother's family, they are Adventists on Wesley's side, and the reason why I went to the church is because I went to visit years before, and it was fun. There were so many youth there at Apple Creek Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Yeah, Apple Creek,
in Markham, that I was like, man, I felt. I had just come back to the country. I didn't know anyone. I wanted to be around people my age, So I went, hung out. Don't know what the pastor was preaching, but I was already so seeped in loving Christ. Like that was like my thing. I love him with all my heart. That being in another church space was not difficult. However, Rich, I used to. I love the word as well. And I used to be, whenever the pastor, myself and my sister, Danica, whenever the pastor would preach like a doctrinal sermon, like on speaking in tongues or on Sabbath, I would literally either in Sabbath school the next week or in the lobby of the church, I would open up my Bible and gather kids around me and say, let's go to the book of Galatians. No more moons, no more Sabbaths, no more. And I'm literally in the lobby unteaching what he just taught. Right.
Wow.
And one day while I was out there doing that, this lady, her name was Rosie Francis, came up touched me on the shoulder. And she said, Damian, why are you doing this? And she said, you know that God has called you to be a pastor in this church. Why are you fighting? And man, bro, the only thing I didn't do was cuss. Because I love the church for the community and the fellowship, but the doctrine, I was like, this is not it, right? But that church loved me. That church loved me to ministry. That church, with everything I just told you, it was such an unusual church because with everything I just told you, they still made me the chaplain of the choir. They still allowed me to lead and worship every once in a while. I still was sitting on committees. You know, they were still inviting me to their homes. They were still, I mean, they loved on me like deeply on this Pentecostal guy. Still had to deal sometimes with people not being allowed to come to my house because my mom cooked pork. But, that's what are you going to do? Every once in a while you deal with that. But, this church really loved me into ministry, and I'm forever grateful. I was back there preaching one day, and Rosie Francis was sitting in the congregation, and bro, I boo-hooed tears, and asked her to stand and say, man, there is no way I would be 20 years into ministry without you following the word of the Lord and putting your hands on the shoulder of a Pentecostal kid who was defiantly unpreaching what was just preached. There's
go ahead, man. Go.
God is someone who's listening right now is wondering about your purpose for your life. And my challenge to you would be, instead of looking forward, look back. Go back and look over the trail and over the trends, and as Richard said, the rhythm in your life. And you will find that God did not just start speaking your purpose when you just started to listen. In fact, he was speaking the whole time. Go back to your grandfather and your grandmother. Ask questions about your father and your mother. Ask questions about your childhood and where you grew up and what you were doing. Rich, do you know that the first time I encountered a Seventh-day Adventist was my principal in my public high school in Barbados? I'd never heard about a Seventh-day Adventist before. I remember one of my friends dying. He drowned, and the funeral was at a Seventh-day Adventist church. That's the first time I encountered it. But when I go back through my life and I look, my purpose has been chasing me my entire life.
Wow.
The notes have been there. I feel like a Joseph or like a David,
Sure.
where the notes have been there the entire time. The message has been there. I was just catching up to what God was saying. I was finally listening. And it was in this Seventh-day Adventist church, and I'm glad. But the other thing I would say is I don't denounce what formed me.
Sure.
The things that have formed me and made me a lover of Jesus did not happen for me in the Seventh-day Adventist church. It happened with Sister Roach, who never missed church in Orange Hill Church in Barbados. And it happened with Pastor Martin, who came from England and took over the Gardens Church. It happened with my mom and dad directing choirs at Chapman Street Church of God in Bridgetown, Barbados, where we had all-day service. It happened at 6 o'clock in the morning, where we had our early morning Christmas service, where it was so long that I had to sleep under the pew. All of these places made deposits into my life that, even though Seventh-day Adventism is where I am and is where I call home, it's not the only home that I've had. And those other places deposited things in me that I believe that my church, my family, and my children and my wife are benefiting from right now, because they taught me Jesus. And it's undeniable for me.
I can relate to that. In my own experience, my mother was not raised Seventh-day Adventist. She was raised Primitive Baptist. And she was introduced to Jesus in the Primitive Baptist church. And I say that just as intentionally as you say, I was introduced to Jesus in the Pentecostal church, because at times, people can have misunderstandings of just where one can be introduced to Jesus Christ, and how the Lord really can come to you in a variety of places, even outside of an official church establishment, right?
Yeah.
And so my mother started speaking as a teenager, Primitive Baptist Church. She developed a love for the word. And it wasn't until she was in college, hours away from home, that a preacher by the name of C.D. Brooks came through town with the Breath of Life evangelistic crusade. And she was going with a friend. And, you know, the first few weeks, this is back in the day of like 8-9 week series, right?
Yeah.
First few weeks is kind of common ground. You know, Jesus is the savior of the world, only way to the Father. But then kind of when things began to those testing truths, as they used to call them way back in the day, she kind of took the similar approach of, I'm going to really show that this is not true, and started going back to her pastor. And you know the whole story. But I know that the seeds that have been planted in my life and in the lives of my siblings did not begin once my mother became a Seventh-day Adventist. And just in case there's someone who's listening to two Seventh-day Adventist pastors say these things, don't hear what we're not saying. We are thankful for the journey. We're just saying the journey had a beginning that preceded and continues to yield dividends. And so I'm connecting with you, brother, wholeheartedly on how I just think that when it comes to composition, okay, let me go back. I heard you say this before. You said the potter's house is not clean because the material the potter deals with is messy, right? So that means that if the final product, whatever the potter is making, it's beautiful. It has been tried in the fire. It has been made to be winsome. It's worth a lot of money. It's going to be sold. But when you go to the house of the potter, you're like, how did you get this from all of that? That's what we're saying. Like, don't just look at the product. You've got to look at the process the potter went through to get there. And if God considers himself to be a potter, that means don't tell me where I can't gather clay and how I can't put things together to make who I want to make. And that's not a one-time event. We are constantly being shaped and pieces taken apart and replaced. And so I love that notion of like, hey, man, Rich, I'm glad to be where I am. I am living out purpose at this stage of my life. But the God who is just as intentionally shaping me, my wife, my kids now, oh, please believe his hands were all on your boy back in Barbados. And that's a point of clarity for a person listening and watching that, you know, do not discredit anything in your past.
No.
Don't depreciate your present. No. And listen, don't deny the fact that God's going to add all of that up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And don't allow anyone else to do it. You know, I do not believe that we need to allow, you know, anyone else to kind of, you know, I think about, like, I don't know, think about David's life. You know what I mean? Somebody says, man, how are you going to be king? You've been a shepherd, like, for real. Yeah. Like, you know, what do shepherds do? What do you know about leading people, right? When all you've been doing is counting doggone sheep. Can you imagine that conversation? Can you imagine David saying, well, let me tell you what I learned as a shepherd. First of all, I learned that sheep are dumb, right? I learned that every once in a while, for the sake of the flock, I have to deny myself. You know, what did I learn as a shepherd? I mean, I learned how to defend the ones that I love. What did I learn as a shepherd, man? I learned that every individual sheep is valuable, right?
Yes.
Enough where I should actually go looking for a wayward sheep. I learned how to feed them. I learned how to water them. That's what I learned. So I, like David, I have no need to deny my past. Now saying that my past is valuable, like you said, does not say that my present is not valuable as well. Right. But one does not have to cancel out the other. And I think that this is something that we need to learn as a church, because as we go out there and we share the dish, I describe Seventh-day Adventism as we're going to a potluck called Christianity.
Yeah.
And there's other dishes from which there's good food there. Like, I mean, we learned how to baptize from the Anabaptists. We learned Sabbath from another group of people. You know, there's really great dishes at this potluck called Christianity. But I got a dish too. And it's a great dish. It's a tasty dish. You know what I mean? And I want you to taste and see that this dish is good. And this dish is a amazing, heavy, powerful, tasty, filling contribution to a span of Christianity that began before this dish was actually around.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
But I'm not ashamed of my dish.
Yeah.
You come taste this dish. You'll love this dish. But I'm also not so big. I'm also not so arrogant to say that there are no other good tasting dishes out there, because I know that our church has benefited from the hymn writers that didn't know what Seventh-day Adventism were, or the praise and worship leaders and songwriters and the preachers and the church design and how do you run a PowerPoint, or, broadcasting online. We're tasting from other dishes that are blessing us. We just don't have to be ashamed of the amazing dish that we have to bless them.
So tell us about your experience after you get to Oakwood College. Was it smooth sailing from then on out, or was it like, okay, God, another outside in experience?
Oh, man. I think I was going to say that Oakwood College was the height of outside experiences for me, but I mean, that's really been my entire life. When I came to Oakwood College, I was baptized 6 months prior. I was baptized in April. I came to Oakwood in August, right? When I got there, I knew the word based on what I was taught, but I didn't know the word from a Seventh-day Adventist perspective. So when I walk into a class and a teacher starts talking about Daniel, I'm like, Daniel, what? Now, one of the things was that when I made that commitment to God to be baptized into the church, I made a commitment irregardless of what Wesley preached. And Wesley preached powerfully that week, but it was a gospel-centric message. It was not on the distinctives of the church. I never did an amazing facts. I never did whatever the other Bible studies are. So when I showed up, I really didn't know much about Seventh-day Adventism in terms of the details of the specifics, the big seven, the 7 S's or whatever it is.
Right.
So I was in class in my first 2 weeks and I was lost. And I just went back home. I said, God, this is not for me. I'm packing up. I'm going home. And I said, unless I part this Bible and you speak to me from the page that I get to, I'm buying a Greyhound ticket back to Toronto. I parted the Bible, and the pericope, the title of the pericope was The Call of the Disciples. So one was that I wasn't culturally Adventist, and a lot of that was new to me. But the second actually challenge was that I was a musician.
Yeah.
I was a musician or a something. I don't even know what I don't play. So I didn't even know what to call myself, but music was a part of who I was, and preaching was a part of who I was. So the problem in the preaching in Mosley Complex is that in Mosley Complex, they considered me a musician. Okay. But in the music department, they considered me a preacher. And then I didn't know. So there were times when the theology majors were doing something like Forum, and I could never go because I was always rehearsing a choir. And then there were times when the choir was traveling and I couldn't go. Like, I was so lost. Richard, up until my senior year of Oakwood, I had never spoken. I had never preached at Oakwood University Church, at Oakwood University. And I think that they chose me because I was graduating and they needed to pull somebody up. But while I was in school, I was always tossed between the two and really could not find a model for ministry or a minister that I could say, man, that's me. I remember people, I remember people imitating the voice of E.E. Cleveland and his sermons. And they were like, that's who I want to be. And, there are other people who were looking at Ward and, his the way he had ministered the church. That's what I want to be. And I was lost. I was like, man, I don't hear anyone who preaches the way I want to preach. I don't hear anyone who has found a way to fit music and ministry together. Like, I really felt like the ultimate outsider, and that I just didn't fit, anywhere.
Yeah. That's refreshing. And I say it's refreshing not because I'm downplaying your experience at all. I say it's refreshing because I think you vocalizing it at one and the same time vocalizes those who can't say that for themselves. That I don't have a reference point for what it is that I know I'm called to do, or for my particular gifting, my particular utterance, and I think we all go through that, right? Where you're trying to emulate or imitate. And some of that has its place where you can gravitate towards someone and anything down to the particulars of their cadence, their rhythm, whether in song or in preaching. And then there are just sometimes where it's an anomaly. There's kind of like, I don't know where it is. But I'm still going on this journey. That's the thing I wanted to get to. Like, it's not like you have a chance to take flight or kind of go up on the balcony and look down on the dance floor and say, can I now locate someone who's kind of dancing to my beat? You're still, you gotta make it through, right? So you're going through school, and for the listeners who they don't have a reference point. So Oakwood College, now Oakwood University, this is in the Seventh-day Adventist faith community. And even maybe a little bit more characteristic, the Black Seventh-day Adventist community, it's like the hub of intelligentsia. Like, this is where you go to be trained. It's the Mecca. Students from around the nation and even outside of the US come here 3, 4, 5, some people longer, and then they are dispatched to wherever they go to do whatever they're doing. Yeah. Especially, and this is kind of a part of the reputation, especially those who pursue pastoral ministry. Now, we all know that, it's more than that, but everyone still knows that Black preachers, by and large, have either heard of Oakwood, went there for like continuing education, or like you and me had the chance to go there for a full undergraduate experience. Yeah. So I say that to say that's a context in which Damian is speaking. He's saying at this Mecca where so many people came with baggage, good baggage, to say, I know who I want to be like. I found something to plug into in E.E. Cleveland and C.D. Brooks and Walter Pearson, et cetera, et cetera. You've got to now just kind of get on board with him and feel like, man, maybe even to draw in soccer language, it's like, imagine a team of teenagers who say, man, I'm trying to be the best Lionel Messi, the best Ronaldo, that I can be. But then there's this kid who's like, not Pele, not Beckham. I can't plug in anybody. You got to feel like that's a potentially lonely experience. So how does this thing take shape, man? How do you get to the point where you're comfortable? Maybe that's not the right word. How do you graduate and keep going while still, hungering for some reference point? Or how does God say, well, I'm not going to give you reference points. I'm just going to make that into you. What happens?
Well, he didn't give me a reference point. I didn't have a reference point all the way through school. And even right now, Richard, I actually have a hard time sitting down listening to preachers, because when I'm sitting down listening to it for my own soul, I oftentimes don't find that voice that really resonates fully with who I am. Cool. So a process started for me then where I was not able to find all of who I was in one person, but I could find segments of who I would be in multiple people. Right? Yeah. So I encountered Dwan Starling, and Dwan was the first person that introduced me to this idea of this world of music at Oakwood University. And then I heard Walter Pearson preach a sermon in Toronto. And the sermon was about the power of God. And he said, I wanted to understand the power. So I went down to the power company. And immediately I was like, you did what? And then when I went to the power company, they said, I asked them, how do you get power from the plant to the house? And they said, well, if we gave the power from the plant directly to the house, it would burn up. So we have some kind of transistor to download the power into usable form. And then he talked about the transistor. You see those poles in the air, and they got these big wide beams across the top, and they're transistors on top. Then he talked about the cross. Then he talked about the cross being God downloading power from heaven into a form that we could use. I was like, oh my God, that was amazing. Like, the storytelling. So it wasn't the cadence and everything before. I was like, wow, that was a story. And man, that thing hit me so hard. And I said, that's what I want to do when I stand up to preach the word. I want to take the mysteries of God and I want to deposit them and explain them through the simplicities of life. And that really blew that blew the lid off of preaching for me. A lot of the rest of it, I still had to find a way on my own. And so I consider myself a late bloomer when it comes to preaching, but I'm always piecing and find, oh, I love that. I love that, to try to create this ethereal preacher in my mind that really represents, this is the example of preaching for me. So the arm is from Pearson, the head is from Doggett. It got a chest and belly of the brass of somebody else. You know, it's just all these pieces that kind of make up this this ethereal preacher. And in that preacher, I see myself and I find my place. In music, I just did what I was passionate about. I knew I had to do it. I knew it took me away from some things, but I ended up directing Voices of Triumph, and that ended up being a family for me. And in that space, I started to write music again. And the music part took off from there. And then again, you know, we're talking to people who are looking for their purpose. So, you know, I'm talking directly to you now, someone who's looking for your purpose. Don't deny the things you're good at, because what you're good at doesn't fit where you are, right?
Yeah.
Because in the end, when I was looking for a job, this pastor comes to the campus and he says, I'm looking for a theology major who's passionate about youth ministry, but can also run a music department.
Ding, ding.
Hello. Well, you know, to tell the truth, that year, there was only one candidate, and that was me. So what I realized is that my unique gift and my outsider perspective will make me not a candidate for many positions, but it will make me the only candidate for a few. And my odds are actually much higher in the idea that there are 3 positions that are looking for a music guy who can preach and run a youth department, and there's only one candidate. Versus if I had chosen a road of maybe wanting to be a generalist, you know, it's just the way God works. Joseph, you know, only one man in the prison knows how to interpret dreams. Only one man in the kingdom.
Right.
Now, oh man, I've never thought about this before, Richard. His dreaming is what got him in trouble in the first place. So I could imagine him saying to God, I don't want to dream no more. I don't want to interpret dreams no more. But his dreaming was actually what distinguished him, that took him to where God wanted to go. So yes, your unique gift is a trouble for you right now, but don't put it in the attic. Don't put it away, because God is about to take that unique gift that has been an agitation to you for so long, and that is going to make you, that is going to set you apart, and also really, you know, mark the trajectory of your entire life. So don't despise your unique gifts just because they don't fit where you are at that particular moment.
So what happens when you hit the ground in the youth program? How does that go?
Learning from scratch. Because once again, I didn't see any youth program that represented what I wanted to do. But I had a great head pastor who just gave me room, you know, to live with these kids. And Rich, I experienced something with them that changed my entire life. Our church was right in the heart of Seattle, Emerald City. And we were right across the street from high schools. So I would put on a backpack and dress up like a kid. And, you know, there were no security guards at that time. And I would walk in and sit in classes, you know, and then my kids would introduce me to all their friends as their youth pastor. And people thought it was so cool that I was at the high school just walking around, public high school. And so when we started our youth group, man, we had kids walking in off the street. You know, we went from maybe 5 kids to 30 to 40 kids on Wednesday night at the church. But these kids were not Adventists. These kids were kids who just had interesting, difficult, challenging lives, man. And the Lord just told me their lives must speak. So we started to write plays about their lives, right? Plays that really told their stories. And we took these kids who had never left Seattle. One of my kids had never been to the airport, never seen what the airport looked like. And we took them around the country telling their stories around the world. So our experience was we wanted to expose them to more. We took them on trips, we took them to camps. But then we also wanted them to be seeped in ministry. So our youth group on a Wednesday night, we would go down to like the homeless encampment in Seattle. I wasn't wise. I didn't know what I was doing. There were no parental,
consent forms.
No, there was none of that. And man, we would go down there. I remember one time we had this thing. We would repeat, God has not given me the spirit of fear, but love, power, and a sound mind. We would say it over and over again. That was our mantra. We go down to this park and it's flooded with homeless people, man. Yeah. And the kids get out of the car and they go running through the park. And I mean, these kids are not like this, like handing it out, like, here you go. They're sitting on steps, sitting on the curb, sitting on the grass, in face-to-face conversation, ministering, praying. And this pastor I'm at the van because I'm scared, right? Literally, I'm not about, I didn't grow up, but like I'm at the van. So one of the girls, I tell this story all the time. One of the girls came up to me and said, "Hey, pastor, there's a drug deal happening in the back of the park. I think we should go down there." And I said, "No, daughter, you go call all your friends and all the youth group. We getting back into the van. We're going home." She's like, "Pastor, there's a drug deal in the corner of the park. We need to go down there." This girl, Richard, was 12. Wow. I said, "No, we're not going down there." She said, "Pastor, God has not given us the spirit of fear. He's given us love, power, and a sound mind. There is a drug deal happening in this park. We need to go down there." So she grabbed me by the hand. We go down there and there's this woman and she's like shaking, and there's this drug dealer and he has a wad of cash in his hand, more money than I had ever seen with my eyes. This little girl grabs the hand of this woman who is trying to buy drugs and the hand of the drug dealer and says, "It looks like we need to pray. Is there something we need to pray about?" She looks at the lady and she says, "Ma'am, can I pray for you?" And the lady looks at her shaking and she says, "Can you pray that I'll break this addiction?" And she looked at the drug dealer and said, "What do you need me to pray about?" He said, "Can you pray for my kids?" This girl bowed her head and prayed one of the most powerful prayers I had ever heard in my life. And then that drug dealer, like once she let his hands go, he walked in the middle of the park and he shouted and he said, "These kids are good with me. They're under my protection. If anybody messes with them, you will have to deal with me." Then he turned to me and said, "Pastor, this park is yours. You can come here."
Good night.
And that was our experiences. Our experience was really real. It was kids moving in with us and living with us, because, of issues at home and getting calls that somebody's wants to commit suicide. Can I come downtown and, and just sit with them on the curb? That was formative and it made ministry transforming. It's not ministry is not what just happens on Sabbath morning. That's whatever. It's living with people and walking with people and watching them grow. And those kids we're still connected, like hardcore connected. And at every turn in their lives, Tanzy and I are able to plug in and connect and celebrate them.
We see now beginnings as an outsider. You're pursuing a number of things with some aggression and passion. And God says, this is kind of where I have you pointed, but really we're going to go this way. There's this one call that comes and it just so happens that you're the candidate now. And there's a youth component there. Now I want to take a leap over years. Like I said at the beginning, we can't cover everything. That's the beauty of it. You'll have to come back again. You said something happened 2019. You are standing on a stage in front of literally, sometimes preachers can round up. No, this is literally thousands of people in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Invite us into that moment.
Yeah. So remember, I talked about unique gifts. When I went to Andrews University, a lot of, for those who don't know what Andrews is, it's our seminary where you would go to do your master's, and most of our pastors end up there. Well, if you went to Oakwood, you really don't want to go to Andrews, tell the truth. Like,
completely different experience.
You just don't want to be there, right?
Yeah.
But because I had pursued music, when I went to Andrews, I started to direct the choir there and was very involved in ministry there. I was invited to preach on the first, it's called Cruise with a Mission, where they take young adults on a cruise ship, and at every port we do mission work. And I was a part of the team that planned the first one. And I preached on that cruise, and let's just say it didn't go all that well, or it wasn't all that well received. And it was really one of the low points of ministry for me, because I really respected this group, CYE, that I was a part of. But the sermon didn't go well. 10 years later, that same group, Cruise with a Mission, called and asked, would you be our speaker for our 10-year anniversary? And in my head, Rich, I'm like, man, if you go to a church and it doesn't go well, why would they call you back to be their 10-year anniversary speaker? But I went, and man, the Spirit of the Lord was in that place in an unusual way. And God, remember, you look over the train of your life, right?
Yes, sir.
I showed up before we got on the boat. They asked me to come. I was like, okay, sure. I show up, Richard. I was like, man, this boat looks familiar. Now, part of the story is that Cruise with a Mission goes on a different ship every year.
Right.
It's a different cruise line, different ship. But when I show up, I'm like, man, this ship looks really familiar. And it was the first ship that they cruised on 10 years previous.
Yeah.
Then when I got into the room, a lot of the people who were there 10 years before were now there on this cruise. And then when I'm preaching, I realized that I'm preaching to a lot of the same crew. But the Holy Spirit is so in that room. It was unbelievable. God was moving in powerful ways on that ship. At the end of that week, I came home, and CYE actually plans for Oshkosh. And I turned to Tanzy one day and I said, they're about to ask me to preach for Oshkosh.
Wow.
And Oshkosh, for those who don't know, is our youth gathering. It's the second largest gathering of Adventism in the entire world. And they have an average of somewhere in the range of 65,000 worshipers in one place at one time. And they always choose one nightly speaker. And I turned to Tanzy and I said, I think they're about to ask me to preach for Oshkosh. She says, why? How do you know? I was like, I just know. And I got a call, a few weeks later, and they asked if I would preach if I would be the speaker for Oshkosh. And I said yes. So that began a different journey, which I'd never experienced before. I'd never been in a place where they really assembled the greatest and the best, not just from Adventism, but just from around the world. Like the production, it was just crazy. I'd never experienced anything like that in my life. So when they asked me to come, they gave me a warning. And one of the warnings was, people really come, they do a Broadway play every single year that happens every night. It's about an hour every night, this play. And then the preacher just comes up and kind of closes it up in the end. And they warned me, and they said, we just want to warn you that people don't come to Oshkosh to listen to the preacher. They come for the play. So if you see 30,000 people get up and leave when you stand up to preach, don't be offended. That's just what happens to everybody.
Yeah.
But when they said that to me, I said in my head, this is appointed.
Yeah.
This is, you're about to see God do something that you've never seen before. Not because of me, but because this is an appointed moment. I had 6 minutes every night to preach a sermon, that was crazy.
Yeah.
But what we did was we sat down and we made the sermon. If they're gonna see this play, then the sermon needs to be a play. So how can we make this visual? And they had everything. 30-foot LED wall. I was like, let's jump into this. So I was preaching on storms. I was like, on that night, I need the stage to turn into a storm. I was preaching on eagles. I was like, I need to see a larger than life eagle on the screen. And just every night we were making the sermon, it was Walter Pearson all over again. Tools that Walter Pearson didn't have, right? To make it visual. And the first night I preached, maybe about, of the 65,000, maybe about 10,000 people left. But the next day, people were coming up to me and saying, man, I left, but I heard I should have stayed. Second night, maybe about 5,000 people left. Third night, maybe about 2,000 people left. By the fourth night, people were coming to me and saying, the play is good, but I'm here for the word.
Wow.
I'm talking about kids. I'm talking about 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 teenagers, old people. Are coming up to me and saying, I'm really here for the word. The final day, they gave me 25 minutes, the sermon on Sabbath. And for that sermon on Sabbath, God had told me that he was going to do something extraordinary. And it was when we were making a call for baptism. When I start to make the call, the flood of people that start to come was overwhelming. Now, every single night at Oshkosh, it's timed, and you literally stick to your time within seconds. There's a clock in front of me that tells me how much time, and I was reminded, even though it was going well, you got to stick to your time, because I went over by a minute one time, or 30 seconds one time. When people start to come, Richard, it was amazing, because the leader of the entire thing, Ron Whitehead, was sitting in the front row, and I stopped preaching. And I looked to him and I just lifted my hands like this. Like, if people look at the video, I lifted my hands like this, and I was looking at Ron, and he bowed his head and he just went like this.
Keep it going.
And I kept calling and I kept calling. That day, somewhere in the range of 2,000 kids came to Christ. And at the baptism, we baptized, by the time we left, 1,400 young people. It was the largest baptism in the last 20 years in North America, and one of the largest baptisms that year in the entire world for the World Church. People were still getting baptized off of Oshkosh when they went home. And I think the numbers are somewhere north of 1,500 young people who were baptized at Oshkosh. And man, all of that is glory to God. But every night before I went up, I was on the brink of vomiting, and just so. After that, Richard, I had some encounters that really shifted a lot for me. And I'll just tell you about one of the encounters. I was finished preaching one night, and this lady came back, this older lady came back backstage. And all this time, I'm still seeing myself as an outsider. God is moving, but I'm like, man, this is not Adventist preaching. This is not Adventist calls. I don't know what this is. It's that preacher that I had created in my head of all these pieces, right? But he didn't fit, because he himself is an outsider. This lady walks up to me and she says, young man, can I speak to you? I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, I am from the Ellen G. White Estates. I was like, oh no, this is not going to be good. And she says, I can't remember the name of the man. You might know. She was like, did you know that there was an African-American gentleman who was the first prophet of the Seventh-day Adventist Church before Ellen White? And I said, no, I did not know that. And she says, well, I came to tell you that I have been praying for God to move and to see Pentecost before I died.
Yeah.
And the spirit of that man is on you. And I saw Pentecost today. And she just walked off. And I said, man, like, God, what are you doing?
Yeah.
This is nuts. People in the Adventist church don't talk that way.
Yeah.
She literally said to me, she said she wanted to see Pentecost before she died. She said, I saw it today and now I'm ready to die. I was like, bro, I don't know, man.
Yeah, that definitely will have you pausing and saying, okay, God, those are experiences that you don't play with.
No.
That's real.
No.
That's real.
It's very real. It's very real. And it makes me to hunger for those experiences in my church and in my community and in the church at large.
Sure.
We want to see Pentecost again.
Yeah.
We want to see tremendous transformation again. We want to see hundreds and thousands coming to Christ again. And it is possible if we believe that God still moves in that way, that we can still see Pentecost before we die.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you translate all that you've shared in terms of having this inner conviction that I'm called? And even though my experience has kind of been as an outsider, there are the main lanes, quote unquote, and then there are the other lanes, right? Mm-hmm. And yet they all somehow lead you to the destination that you're supposed to get to. How do you, what's the word I'm looking for? Bring these principles of life to life in your own home. You're a father, you're a husband. As I have gotten to know you and as we have shared space in various capacities over the years, you've made it abundantly clear that you're unapologetically about your family, right? So how do you kind of inform your children with this sense of listen to God? You can develop your own relationship with him. And how do you and your wife kind of lead this life together as a unit?
As outsiders, one of the freedoms that we've given to our kids and we accept as a family is the ability to craft our own lane, to do what works for our family. So this might not make sense to everyone out there, but Sabbath for me, a good Sabbath for me is outside with my kids throwing a football, or having an opportunity to shoot some hoops with my 10-year-old, and it's just him and daddy, or taking a hike down to a river somewhere. We have given ourselves freedom to craft our own lane and to realize that doesn't necessarily look like others, and it doesn't necessarily represent what others would do, and we're not going to place who we are on you. But we are determined to be who God has called us to be. So my sons play soccer, for example. And I know that a lot of people have not been able to pursue their dreams, but we are determined for our sons to pursue theirs. And so my two sons are actually very good, excellent soccer players, better than I was. And one of them, there are various levels in soccer, and at every level we've been told, you'll never be able to play on that level because you guys don't play on the Sabbath, right?
Right.
In fact, Richard, someone walked up to me and they said, your son, he's so amazing. And I was like, oh, praise God. And she was like, I'm not even talking about his soccer. He's an amazing soccer player, but he's an amazing person. But then she said, but I kind of feel like if you guys, he has the ability to do something great in soccer, but you guys are holding him back because he doesn't play on Saturday. And I said, well, at some point, my son is going to make a decision for himself. Whatever decision he makes, I will support. If my son is a professional soccer player somewhere, he won't have to look very far for his daddy. His daddy will be standing next to him on the sidelines or in the stands or something, because he will always be my son, no matter what decisions he makes. However, I said, I'm not trying to raise a great soccer player. I'm trying to raise a man that will change the world. And putting God first is how he changes the world. And this person happened to be not of my hue. And she looked at me. She said, he's going to change the world. And she walked off. And so we have opportunities in spaces that to really live this thing in a very real way that other people are able to connect. And then watch God open doors for my kids, literally, and do things, Richard, that should not happen. My son has made teams where coaches who didn't even believe in God originally said, we don't make exemptions for religion in our. And then all of a sudden, I said to my son, listen, be the best soccer player out there and force him to make a decision. All of a sudden, he's on the team. So he's continued to matriculate that way. And right now, he is playing for Sacramento Republic, which is an MLS Next team, which means that he's in an MLS academy and is on that trajectory. That is where he is. You never know where God will take him. But again, to answer your question in a more concrete way, we are determined for our kids to follow their unique paths, whether or not other people understand them. We give them freedom to do so. We ask, request, and demand that our church also gives them freedom to do the same. You know, they don't go to church in shirts and ties. They don't feel comfortable that way. They wear, they wear jeans, ripped up jeans and t-shirts. And our church is not that kind of church, but they've given them room. And I think that their testimony has also given other young people room to be individually who they are and to pursue who God has called them to be uniquely. And again, it causes us to be outsiders at times within Adventist culture. But I think that we bring a flavor to that culture as well, that, hopefully is helpful.
Yeah. It's interesting that you've shared, just quite openly about my life's journey has kind of had this outsiders theme. And Kyla and I, my wife, talk about it all the time, how a person's own self-assessment, obviously knowing more of their journey than anybody else, may in many ways not be what people would see looking at them. So from the moment we started, I was just like, no way, every segment of the conversation has introduced something literally new for me that I didn't know, but it's just added more color and more context for what our interactions have been. Because I remember several years ago, you were basically kind of pointing to your wife and entrepreneurial endeavors that she was doing. And you were saying, basically in our context, and I would say in other faith communities as well, but whenever you're a pastor, it's really easy for life to revolve around what the pastor's doing. We move where I get a job, we stay where my job is. What is promoted is going to be, his ministry or her ministry. The kids need to fall in line. And just your choice to say, my wife is doing something and it's big, it's huge. And I'm not just doing this to get likes on my post. This is my wife and this is her gift. This is her passion. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, yeah. That's it, right? Because come on, Damian, we've seen it countless times where spouses, just give up on dreams, sacrifice hopes, children have hearts broken. And I'm not trying to present a stereotypical avatar to say, pastoral families just are inherently broken. That's not what I'm saying. Or kids are bound to just be disappointments. But what I am saying is it takes intentionality and it takes a level of conviction that I don't care what other people might say. And like you've said already, people might not get it. My wife has an endeavor and I'm going to get behind this. My children, correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't it not long ago that, was it? I hope I'm not mistaking this, but I feel like not long ago, your daughter, and I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because of I'm thinking about how all in you are for your family. You said, listen, many of you guys might not get this, but I'm going with my daughter right now to a fair. Am I tracking right?
Yes.
And we're going to a fair and she is about to enter her goat. Is it? Yeah. And people think it's crazy, but this is my daughter. I'm saying all of these different examples. You've offered your son, your daughter, your wife. And I'm like, I would have never thought that any of this kind of I am husband exhibit A, father exhibit A. Not that you're calling yourself perfect. You're just saying I've made a choice that I'm getting behind my wife and behind my children. I'm going to be present. I would not think that comes from a backdrop of feeling like you've shared with us, you felt like outside in. But now that you've shared that, it's like, it all makes sense. Like, I don't care if, like, my wife don't have to wear a top hat with lace gloves and play the piano, you know what I mean? And cook dinner roast casserole, right? And she might do all those things. I don't know. Yeah. But that's not the mold that she has to fit in. Neither will I fit my children in the mold. And I'm wondering if God did not send you through years of saying, Damian, you don't have to fit into the mold.
Yeah.
Could you have passionately and unapologetically said, baby, kids, maybe God has not called the Chandler home to fit into the molds, but to create other molds, or to tell people, forget the molds altogether.
Yeah.
God will shape you as he wants you to shape. And there's no better mold than his hands, you know? Yeah. And I love that about you. And I love that I have been watching and taking pieces from that. I remember when you were kind of promoting and saying, hey, what if life is not about complexity, but simplicity? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, what if, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I'm just saying, man, it's amazing how the very journey you've been on is preparatory, you know?
Yeah, it's true. You know, and all first of all, praise God. If you see, I'm grateful that you saw something that was valuable to even pay attention to. But my wife, man, Richard, you know what my wife loves? CrossFit.
Really?
If there was a church of CrossFit, my wife would be the pastor. Okay.
Amen.
My wife was a rugby player.
Wow.
You know? Like just the antitypical. Yeah, she told me one time that one member walked up to her early in our ministry and says, "So, pastor preaches and sing. What do you do?" And she answered. She said, "I play rugby." Just like, you know, but I think that actually has given freedom, you know, to women in our church to explore. And when I see women like just drawn to my wife, you know, they're drawn to who she actually is and who she naturally is. She doesn't have to put on any airs. This is who I am. You know, we Oshkosh, once again, my wife is the queen of introverts.
Yeah.
So Oshkosh is a problem. Like, it's just, what did she do with it? She, like, out of nowhere, Richard, she becomes a comedian, and she starts all of these like 2-minute clips on the introvert at Oshkosh. Richard, like thousands of people are watching these clips, and I didn't even know my wife was funny. Like, it just came out of her. You know, it's just be who you are, explore who you are as God leads you to places. You know, as God opens up doors, don't be afraid to put your foot in. You know, you can walk back out if it doesn't fit, if it doesn't work, you know. But this good. Is, I know that you have a number of ministers who watch, and I have a friend, his name is Vandion Griffin. Vandion said to me one time, man, you know how I decide where I go? I decide where I go when I know it will work for my family, because God will bless me wherever I am. To all the ministers who are watching right now, I don't know if this is going to work, but I want to set you free from something that you have been told, right? The thing that you've been told is that there is a model for ministry, and you are successful when you follow certain rungs, and you're climbing up these rungs, and you know what it is. You know, every time we feel stuck in our churches and the church is not growing, all of a sudden we hear a word from the Lord, and this is not for everybody. We hear a word from the Lord. We get a call from a president to go to a bigger place and a bigger place and a bigger place and a bigger place. I don't know if you know, but they don't pay you anymore. You know,
they don't.
You don't get any more, you know, but there's all these calls for bigger, bigger, bigger. And I did that for a while, and it hurt my family.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times is my daughter going to say goodbye to friends and be the outsider again? How many times is, you know, going to go to places and my son doesn't even remember the people that he was born with? So and then my wife is going to switch jobs, you know? So when we came here, this was our prayer. Father, give us a home.
Yeah.
Give us a home. Rich, we wanted a home. We wanted a place where our kids can remember, a place where they could grow up with their friends. My wife and I made a commitment. We're not leaving. We're not going anywhere. There's no bigger pulpit anywhere. I've been I've been freed and delivered from looking for the next biggest pulpit.
Come on, Damian.
And it is primarily because of my family. When we came here, we said, if you want us, if we accept this job, you will not see us for less than 7 to 10 years, and you might see us for longer. I'm about to go into year number 8 next year, and it's been great. And it hasn't always been easy, and there've been times where that fight or flight thing just came up again. But then I looked at my kids, and I can't make my kids say goodbye again. I can't make my wife look for another job. I just will not do it. And I don't believe it's God's call on my life. And God, it's like that call he gave that Abraham, that Abraham Lot decision, where Abraham was so sure about the anointing of God on his life, that Abraham said to Lot, you choose wherever you want, because wherever I go, the promise of God is with me. So we're in Sacramento. It's not a city that a lot of people have heard about. It's not a city a lot of people want to visit, but it's our city. It's a city for us, the outsiders. And we pastor an amazing church with amazing people. But if it wasn't amazing, and if the city wasn't great, the decision that we made for our family. And our family is thriving because we were bold enough to choose maybe a path that was antithetical to what we were taught ministry was supposed to do. And where we're supposed to be. A few months ago, I got a call for what was in my school days, my dream church. Dream. It was the place where I wanted to be. That's the place. I wanted my name and my picture up on that wall. And being able to say no, that's not God's call for my family, was one of the most liberating experiences.
Yes, sir.
In ministry. I still had to mourn a little bit. But listen, to all the ministers who are watching, anyone else, don't allow anybody else's path. Don't allow anyone to dangle any carrots that make you chase it, because you'll never catch that carrot. Learn how to be happy and content where you are. Learn how to find your purpose where you are. Learn how to be all that God wants you to be in the sphere that you're in, and transform the cities and the places and the pews that God has blessed you to be a part of.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think that God gives us space to do both. He gives us space to be freed by walking in obedience, but also to mourn what obedience might mean, Yeah. And you speak to the seasons of life. I can relate to that. I think we all can relate to it in whatever discipline we're in, that there might be some semblance of a dream, of a picture of what the good life would be. For me, for a pastor, for family. Yeah. And sometimes we do get a taste of what it is, right? And then sometimes we're like, I knew it. Okay. Then other times we're like, this is not the good life. I thought it was, but having experienced it. And then there are times where we never really, like you said, get that carrot, and it forever remains. But carrot is only one type of vegetable. There's so much else out there. And God says, you around here chasing carrots, man. What about this? And you're like, God, keep the carrots. Give me more of this. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I remember when you all were going to Sacramento, and again, man, just little things you pick up along the way. You guys drove, right? And in many ways, it can really be like farewell one church, one Sabbath, installation, another church, next Sabbath. Yeah. But just the choice to say, I'm not rushing my family. Like, this is a huge move. We're taking our time. We're going up, we're going over, we're coming down, and we're going to get there when we get there. Now, I'm not saying it didn't have strategy, that, there wasn't thought behind it, but the thought to say, I'm about to go into something that will be time consuming. Pastoral ministry is Myron Edmonds, another brother of ours that we know. He says often, pastoral ministry, as it has been done, can be hazardous for pastors' families.
Yes.
And I think we both know by experience how true that is and how true it can be. Yeah. And so something that many people might say is like, so you drove to California. It's like, no.
Yeah.
That drive becomes a life experience, a shared memory that could have easily been missed out on if you were like, we'll ship our cars and fly, And I just wanted to say that to say those kinds of things really, really go a long way. My brother, you already said it at the beginning. There's so many different ways we could go with this. And I just have like 2 more questions and we're out, right? One's pastoral, and then one has to do with you as an author. The pastoring would be, just speak briefly, if you wouldn't mind, on having cultivated friendships in ministry. My research right now in school is on pastoral, emotional, and mental well-being, and, relationships and support systems. Has that been a challenge for you? Has it been a benefit for you, to really have friends in ministry?
Oh, man. Absolutely. Now, you already know I'm going to go around the...
And that's fine. I don't want to box you in.
I am the king of extroverts. As a result, I'm always connecting with people.
Sure.
But that became hurtful, even in ministry, over years, until the Lord told me that I need to redefine friendship.
Okay.
So I have kind of like 5 positions in my life. I call it my starting 5. I got my brothers and my sisters. These are people where if I die, they would never let my family miss a payment.
Yeah.
Then I got friends. I got associates. Yeah. And then there's other positions, but I got my brothers, my friends, my associates.
Yeah.
I think in ministry, one of the challenges is because we do the same thing, there is the expectation that everyone who also preaches in another pulpit is at least a friend and maybe a brother or a sister, right? And I think that the misunderstanding of these roles and the lack of courage to be able to say where people fit leads many ministers to very disappointing experiences where you're sharing with someone who's really an associate. What you should only be sharing with a brother or a friend.
That's it. That's right? It.
And so I've gotten to the point now where, bro, there are some people who are literally ride or die.
Yeah. Doesn't matter.
Oh man. Oh man. Like when I say literally, if I tell the stories and I share, it would be a shame. I got people who are ride or die, and they're ride or die for me, my brothers, my sisters, whether or not I wear a collar. Yeah. If I could never preach another sermon, if I could never preach another song, these people are for me. Those are my brothers, my sisters. And then I have friends. These are people for whom we have time. Now, my brothers, my sisters, if they ended up being mass murderers, they would still be my brothers and sisters. Yeah. I got friends and friends who maybe we met each other in school. We had a good time. We know each other. Our families know each other. If you happen to be in town, I would expect to see you, hang out.
Sure.
That would be cool. But then I have associates, and these are people that I know broadly.
Yeah.
And if I happen to be in town and it's your town and I knew, and I might call or I might not, but and if you had time, it was good. And if you don't, that's cool too.
Okay. Yeah.
That whole idea of breaking down my relationships. And then there are people who are none of those.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is, we're being honest, right? There are people who are.
And that's important too.
Very important.
Yeah.
Very important. David did not hesitate to say, Lord, this person is an enemy. Enemy. Right? No, you can't come to my house. I'm not returning no calls. I don't need to see you at Pelk. I don't need to see you. There are those, right? I think the that has kept me healthy and allowed me to pour more time into the relationships that matter in my life, and allowed me to appreciate even the associates that I have, that have a broad range of people from whom I get to drink every once in a while and experience things that I would never experience because it's a broad range. But I don't hesitate. I don't stutter that I got family. And that family keeps me together. That family holds me accountable. I mean, some of those people I talk to almost every single day, and we pour into each other. And those are relationships that I formed over time. Yeah. So I think it's important for all the ministers, anyone who's watching, to really be bold enough to be able to say where people fit in your life. And when you have those brothers and sisters, don't take them for granted. Pour into them. They should be getting more of your time. They should be getting more of your attention. They should know things about you that other people just don't know. Why?
Come on now.
They don't have the right to know, because they don't have the position to know. They don't need to know, right? There should be some striation of relationships in your life. And when you have it, don't apologize. Don't apologize. And that goes for pastors in church too. Maybe this is a problem for some. But I love all my members. I love them to the ground. But there's some members that know a little bit more about me than others. Right? And that's okay, because all of my members also have that honor and that privilege of being able to choose. All of these people are my brothers and sisters at Capital City, but they're people that I'm more attached to personally, right, than others. And I've maintained that through ministry. I've maintained that through ministry. Tell you a quick story. One of my members, I got to a particular church, and me and these people, we just vibed off the bat. And this is before I was married. I was single. And when my wife came, we vibed. So, bro, we would see each other at church and say, hey, pastor, hey, so-and-so, hey, how are you doing, first lady? And then as soon as church was over, we would drive our cars to an empty parking lot miles away and say, okay, where are we going, y'all? What are we about to do? Man, we slept at their house. They slept at our house. You know, give yourself freedom, if you're a minister, to be able to have colleagues who are friends, but also don't forget people that knew you before you had a collar, right? There's some valuable relationships, because the older I get, the more, Richard, I value people who know me.
Yes, sir.
Not know about me. They don't know my gifting. But they know me. Yeah. And those people have valuable places in my life as well. I don't know if I answered your question, but
you sure did. And then some. Brother, that thing right there just spoke to me. I won't even attempt to recap, because that's real. That's real, man. Like that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about, of why we got excited when we were in school to have someone come who just was not so far ahead of us, because that's a golden word right there, in terms of not feeling like you've got to go deep with everybody. You just can't, right? I'm going to put a pin there, because there's so much more I want to say. You've said it, man. I have here The Crooked Christmas Tree. Have you heard of this book? I think you've heard of this book.
Never heard about it before.
And I Am John. Man, you have said this, and sometimes it's difficult to say things of yourself. So sometimes it helps to hear people say it for you. Man, you have an exceptional, phenomenal gift of storytelling. Both spoken and written. I remember being captivated years ago. You were telling the story about one of your early pastoral assignments. It might have been while you were still a youth pastor, or it might have been your first senior pastor assignment. But it was one of those Sabbaths, and I think all of us can relate to it, where, Sabbath came, but the sermon didn't, right? And
I have more than a few of those.
Oh yeah. If we're being honest, we all do, more than a few, right? And it, could be for a number of reasons, but man, and sometimes, like, Lord, oh my goodness. And then sometimes you might not have invested in the prep like you should have, because you might have been resting on last week's great success or whatever. And I don't remember what the details were, but you were just telling the story about how, like, that plane just was not getting off the ground, right? You were trying everything and felt so defeated that you just kind of locked yourself in the office after service. And these two ladies came and were like, Pastor, it don't matter if the sermon went well or not. You're still our pastor. I only referenced that to say this. The way you told the story was like, I'm in the sanctuary listening to this sermon. Like, I'm seeing him shake people's hands, and you shake hands differently when you feel like you did a great job and when you feel like you didn't. You're trying to just get out of that thing. I'm seeing you in the office, lights off, like just in your feelings. Like I'm never coming out. My ministry is just falling apart. Destroyed. And I'm sensing the power of these spiritual women saying, Pastor, man, open this door. You know what I mean? Like, we're going to love on you. And it, first of all, the transparency that you would even share that with us released us, right? That's a reference point for the spoken storytelling. But listen, folks, if you've not read I Am John and the Crooked Christmas Tree, you're missing out. You're really missing out. One of the things that I love about I Am John, I think that really, both of them really represent the theme of, an outsider's look at something that we all know about, right? Yeah. Who doesn't know about the central message of Christmas? And then you might know about David, but do you really know about Jonathan? Without getting into your lane now, tell us, bro, when do you say, I need to write this stuff down? And then what's your process? Are you more of kind of like I just throw all the colors on the canvas and then that's my art? Or are you more like, no, I have a strict outline and then I write from idea to manuscript? How do these two books come to be, man?
Like, bro, yeah.
Do it, man.
Yeah, you know what it's gonna be. The first one, Crooked Christmas Tree, man. Again, about being an outsider. God told me to write a book, and He told me when to finish. So I finished. I believe it was 2013. Told me to finish by midnight. Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, by New Year's 2014 or something. Mm-hmm. And then a friend of ours, Mike Polite, sent me an article. And the article talked about, and I made a deal with God. I said, if I finish this book, you have to take it to the world, right? Yeah. Not just the ABC store. Like you gotta take it out. And so I went through the process of writing the book, but the book was really all of these interactions that I had with outsiders, right? Sure. The outsider Christmas tree, the prostitute that I met on the steps, like the outsider piece of furniture. It follows the theme of my life and how we can see the grace of God through these castaways, right? Yeah. I finished the book. Got the article. The article was talking about how the major publishers accept books, right? Like, how does this happen? And it was basically like, you got to find what do you call it? A representative. You got to find an agent, a book agent. Never heard about that before. You got to find this, you got to find that. The Lord told me who to call. Off the list of about 100 book agents, I called like 5, and I called the book agent for Francis Chan and a whole bunch of people. Yeah. Then I got to this guy. And he said, send me your book. I'll check it out. And he did. And then he called me back. He says, man, I'm coming to Huntsville to see you. He came, and making it short, he talked about everything except the book. He said, the reason why I'm not talking about your book is because I don't believe you wrote it. I've received a manuscript of this quality. And if you wrote it, you can't continue to write on that level. And I said, well, I have the rest of chapters if you want to read it. And I gave it to him, and he read the last chapter and he was in tears. Wow. And he says, I'm signing you today. And from that journey, the book ended up at Thomas Nelson, ended up being turned down by Thomas Nelson because I just wasn't big enough. Like I didn't know enough people can sell enough books. Another agent picked it up, and we ended up with Faith Words. And Faith Words is they're the agent. They are the publishers for T.D. Jakes, Joyce Meyer, just they publish everybody. And the Shack was one of their books, and my editor was one of the editors that worked with that book, The Shack. Yeah. And she tore me up, man. She tore this thing up from the top to the bottom. But she made a good book. She made an amazing book out of it. And just being able to walk into Barnes and Nobles, and I was in the airport one day and the book was in the bookstore in the airport. It was just, surreal to see those things happen. So that book was obedience. The I Am John book was just being fascinated by a biblical story and being fascinated by a biblical character that was ignored, that can easily be ignored in the shadow of a David, and asking myself, how can I rewrite this story? I was with my kids one day wanted to read them something on Sabbath, and there was nothing that would catch their interest, right?
Yeah.
And I said to them, what if I wrote you a book? And this is what we're going to do. Every chapter I write, you have to approve it before I finalize it. And they said, yes. And so that's how I wrote the book. Every time I wrote a chapter, I wrote the chapter, read it to them, and I had to get their thumbs up, and because it was for them. And that book was an amazing journey. And I'm learning how to, we talk about humility as if humility is about always putting yourself down. Right?
Sure.
But that's not what humility is about. And there's room within being humble to be able to say what you do well, right?
Yeah.
And just rereading the books, I've reread them both now recently. And I'm excited about the fact that I Am John was written for my kids.
Yeah.
And I could see my kids' fingerprints, you know, and remember those moments with them. But I gather a basic idea of what I want to do. With I Am John, I gathered all the scriptures about Jonathan, and asked, okay, what is the environment that I'm writing this in? It's a high school basketball team. How am I going to retell? How am I going to retell this story in a palatable way? Who's Saul going to be? And it's really the development of characters that really makes a book. You could write a great line, you could write a great story, but if you don't develop those characters, if people can't feel the frustration of Saul, if they can't feel the anguish of Jonathan in the book when he gets injured, or if they can't feel the tension of when the team walks into the locker room of the other team to grab that poster.
Yes, sir.
I mean,
yes, sir.
It's not gonna work. They got to feel it. They got to hear the basketballs bouncing. They got to hear the boos from the crowd. So developing environments, imaginary environments, is a place where I thrive. And looking at characters and asking what they would feel and what they would say, you know, that kind of work is a work that makes me excited.
If you could send yourself a text message 10 years into the future, what does it say?
10 years into the future. Oh my God. That's a good question. I hope that you're finally okay with being who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Way to stick the landing, bro. Hey, listen, everybody, this has been a refreshing journey. As we said at the beginning, life really is a gift from God, and what we choose to do with it is our gift to Him. And our special guest has really allowed us to know that sometimes gaining clarity comes along a circuitous path, but along the way, God does put the right people in position. He allows us to have the right opportunities. He allows us to learn from our successes and things that we might not consider to be a success. And I'm thankful for my brother and friend, Damian Chandler, for coming and spending time with us here in the living room. I have a sneaky suspicion that he'll be back down the line, but I'm even more confident that based on his presence today, you have been inspired and you've been transformed. As you have listened and learned, now it's time for us to live. Sometimes we live from the inside out. But other times we live from the outside in, and both are okay. Bro, can you share with us how the people can stay in contact with you, where they can invest in what you have created, and how they can just continue to be inspired by your work as a ministry, as a minister, as a husband, and as a father?
Oh, wow. In terms of me, I'm really easy to find. Just hit me up, DM me if you want on Facebook or Instagram. You can go there, Damian Chandler, Damian M. Chandler. You'll find me on there, and I'd love to be able to dialogue with you about your dreams and about your uniqueness and your unique path. In terms of the books, you can find the books pretty much anywhere. Crooked Christmas Tree. You could Walmart, Target, if they still carry it, Barnes and Nobles, and I Am John. You could check it out on Amazon, or just DM me and tell me that you like you'd like me to send you a copy, I would love to be able to do that and to share those gifts and those resources with you.
Thanks, my brother. Listen, that's all we have for this episode of The Living Room. Until next time, continue to listen, continue to learn, and continue to live.